What's up everybody, I'm back with another Destiny 2 video. This one specifically is going to be about what primary exotic you should use as your backup DPS option. Now note I said backup because none of these are going to be able to beat heavy or special weapons necessarily, but they are going to be very solid if you're completely out of ammo, could get screwed out of getting any ammo drops from enemies, and just need to do some meaningful damage towards the end of a boss fight. So I'm going to go ahead and test Outbreak Perfected, Touch of Malice, Hierarchy of Needs, and Revision 0. Now for Revision 0, I did do some assumptions on the math since it doesn't have all its perks yet, and I'll mention this again later, but I will re-edit this video and adjust it as necessary should those perks not work the way we believe they will. But I'll also go over which assumptions I made when it's time for that. And we'll start by talking about Outbreak Perfected. Now, Outbreak is my personal favorite exotic of all time, and it is a classic for primary DPS in Destiny 2, and it does still remain very strong. Notably, most recently at least, it came in clutch for many teams, including my own, during the Vow of the Disciple Day 1 raid, to get to the finish line against the Caretaker boss, due to struggles with heavy weapon and special weapon ammo economy. Uniquely among the weapons in this list, it has a slight RNG element to its perk, the Corruption Spreads. Specifically, you will generate between 1 and 3 Siva nanites on 9 rapid hits, or, in this case, 3 bursts of hitting all your shots. Because of this variable, I am going to go ahead and make a disclaimer that I used an average value of 2 nanites spawning per activation of this perk, just to keep things consistent. Outbreak's other quirk to keep in mind is that it does take some time to ramp up in terms of DPS. But in my testing with a fire team of 6, it took about 1 mag of everybody spraying down a boss to ramp Outbreak up all the way. Although, if you do spawn a lot of triple Siva swarms, then it is a bit faster, and it is a bit slower if your team gets unlucky and spawns 1 Siva nanite each time, multiple times. The other important part is that your Outbreak will start out extremely weak, and will become extremely strong later on. It took us about 7.5 seconds on average to fully ramp up Outbreak with 6 people firing. Although, if you can catch an enemy near the boss and kill it with a precision hit, the other part of its perk will also apply a lot of Siva at once, as those nanites will pop out and seek the boss, and you'll spawn a lot more than 3. Although, this situation is not consistently going to be available, so I did not test with that in mind. Also, during the ramp-up time for Outbreak, your bullets are going to do an average of 3,657 damage each, and for each magazine you fire, you'll do an average of 15,240 total damage from the Siva attachment alone. That will give your ramp-up period an average DPS of 25,546, which is very low, but do keep in mind that it's very heavily weighted towards the back half of the ramp-up time, whereas the first part does very low damage. Once you're fully stacked, however, each Outbreak shot will do 5,984 damage, but the average of 15,240 Siva attachment damage is going to remain unchanged. This means that 1 mag of your Outbreak will now total 215,424 damage, while doing 40,115 damage per second. That's a lot for a primary weapon. It's pretty consistent and competitive with the others that we're going to talk about later. As for the pros and cons of Outbreak, and we'll start with the pros, this thing absolutely slaps as a primary weapon and is arguably the best primary on this list, although that could just be my bias for it being my favorite exotic. You can also piggyback on the damage provided by ally Siva nanites, so hence the weapon becoming much stronger the more people are using it, and this gun clears adds like a menace as a result. It's insane what you can do in a room full of red bars if you just have 2 or 3 Outbreaks running rampant. For the cons, the main one is that this thing takes a bit too long to get going depending on the boss, whereas all the other options necessarily get to their max effectiveness right away. You don't really have to ramp them up like with Touch of Malice or Hierarchy of Needs. You have a perk that you activate before doing DPS, but you don't have to wait for that perk to actually become active. You can just hold it going into DPS phase. However, even older than Outbreak Perfected is the original king of primary DPS, the Touch of Malice. In Destiny 2, it still has its original perk from Destiny 1, where the final round in a magazine will deal double damage at the expense of a small amount of health. However, it also has a new perk, where after landing 10 precision hits, you can long press reload to load a special blight shot that'll do a burst of damage, as well as a quick damage over time effect. This blight shot will also blind non-boss enemies, but its main effect is that it will cause all weapons of sorrow, including Touch of Malice, to deal an additional 50% damage for about 3 seconds. As for its DPS, Touch of Malice on the last shot against a blighted target deals 9,240 damage per shot, and fires 4.33 rounds per second for a total of 40,009 DPS. However, if you are the one that is shooting the Blight shot, it is a little bit lower since the Blight loading animation eats about a second of time and you cannot speed that animation up by any means. Meaning that as the player who is refreshing the Blight debuff, you're going to be doing about 6k less damage for a couple of seconds since the Blight shot itself does help make up partly for the time not shooting, but you only need one player to refresh it, and your fire team should be staggering who fires the Blights to keep it up all the time. As for pros and cons, the pros to Touch of Malice are that it has infinite ammo in the magazine, never requiring a reload so long as you can keep your health high. The Blight Shot perk also provides very good CC and burst damage against both normal enemies and elites, and is very easy to charge. The final shot in your magazine will kill pretty much any enemy pretty efficiently. You will probably be one-shotting red bars even in contest content. And, like with Outbreak, because it's an exotic primary, it gives you the bonus versus red bars, and a bonus to your ammo finders as well. The cons of Touch of Malice are that it damages yourself, and it can kill you, unlike Tommy's matchbook, and if you get low enough, you can also be killed by incoming damage much easier than if you were using something that wasn't damaging you. And like Outbreak, you are going to need more than one Touch of Malice on your fire team, because that Blight debuff lasts such a short amount of time, you'll need to have players taking turns refreshing it. But you don't necessarily need a full 5 or 6 like Outbreak, you can just have probably 3 to 4 people using Touch of Malice and you'll be fine. But moving on once again, Season of the Seraph brought 2 new competitors to this debate. The first of those is our new Dungeon Exotic Bow, Hierarchy of Needs. Hierarchy of Needs' main perk is Guidance Ring, where precision hits and final blows grant progress towards a guidance ring, which at max stacks can be placed by fully drawing a hip-fired arrow. The other perk, Apollonic Target, will cause arrows fired through a guidance ring to spawn 2 tracking arrows that will explode on impact, doing more damage based on travel distance and hitting its max damage at roughly 30 meters traveled. The Catalyst adds the perk Panoptic Tessellation, which makes it so that you get bonus draw speed after placing or firing through a guiding ring. As for DPS, this bow performs pretty well with its Catalyst, which drops from the Master difficulty of Spire the Watcher so long as you've already obtained the bow once. The main arrow will deal 11,093 damage on a crit, and each of the tracking arrows will do 11,035 damage, for a total of 33,163 damage per shot. You can get around 1.33 shots per second, so you'll end up with a DPS value of 44,107 damage. The pros for Hierarchy of Needs are that your hierarchy can use allies' guidance rings. You can recharge your own guidance ring while doing DPS, and it doesn't take any extra time to reactivate, because all you need to do is drop into hipfire, fire an arrow, which if there's another guidance ring, you can place one and spawn tracking arrows at the same time. However, for the cons for Hierarchy of Needs, the DPS will fall off under that 30-meter range. You do need to be at that max distance to get it to work. And the ease of use on this is pretty rough, since you got to keep your guidance ring aligned with your target. Now, your allies' guidance rings can kind of make up for that, but you do still have to have a guidance ring between you and the boss. And since the guidance ring arrows track, they have a bad tendency to go for enemies that aren't even your main target, and that will absolutely butcher your DPS if even one of the arrows starts going for a random enemy. The other thing is that the tracking arrows don't really seem to interact with champion mods, at least with the anti-barrier mod, so if you're dealing with an encounter with champions and want to use a bow mod, maybe skip this one. Although the DPS that you'll be able to get is still quite high, even if you can't really get the most out of champion mods with it. And then lastly, we have the newest exotic release, Revision 0. Now, as a quick disclaimer, at the time of writing and testing this, Revision 0 did not have any of its catalysts or main column perks available, so the values that I provide here are going to assume 2 primary things. The first is that Vorpal Weapon on the alternate fire mode will use the proper 20% value that primary weapons use, and the second is that 4th times the charm will work with the alternate sniper fire mode. Since this is the only pulse rifle in the entire game with 4th times the charm, I think it's safe to assume that it is on this pulse for the sniper mode, not the pulse rifle mode. And if that's not the case, I will re-edit this video after those final catalysts and perks become available, and I will then insert the correct values. Now that that's out of the way, Revision 0's Sniper Fire gives you 4 shots with max targeting data. Currently, with no Vorpal Weapon or 4th times the charm, you'll be able to put out 40,067 DPS with a total of 135,439 damage. But after the 3 or so seconds it takes you to dump those 4 shots, your DPS is going to fall off the face of a cliff. However, with Vorpal and Fourth Times the Charm, if we take the two assumptions I gave earlier, then you get 49,785 DPS for a total of 243,439 damage. And that's all put out in under 5 seconds, which is incredibly quick. This thing ends up almost acting like a second sniper rifle with one magazine available. As for the pros and cons of Revision 0, for the pros, you've got intrinsic anti-barrier, low zoom on the sniper mode, which makes hitting your target very easy, and a quick swap over to the sniper mode. It's also a crafted weapon, so it's very customizable. Even if you default to the Vorpal and Fourth Times roll as your perks, you do still get to choose your magazines and barrels to whatever you'd like the most, as well as getting to select between the 4-shot burst and the 2-shot burst, both of which are very strong. Vorpal weapon also helps against elites and champions, not just bosses. As for the cons to Revision 0, well, to start, for top DPS, the perks that you're going to have to use are not really all that interactive with normal tier enemies. You may not find yourself getting that much value out of Vorpal versus certain encounters. And the second thing is that targeting data takes a while to stack up, even on the 4-shot burst mode, and it takes an especially long while on the 2-shot burst. And the last thing is that the DPS will fall off pretty hard after you run out of charged shots that you could use. And then, just as a quick way to end this video, we're going to do a really fast ranking of each of these weapons specifically as a backup DPS option. At the number 1 spot, I'm going to put Revision 0, assuming that the Vorpal and Fourth Times perks will work as expected on this, because it has good, fast damage, doesn't really need any assistance from your fire team, and it is a very low trade-off for some quick and free damage. Then after that, at second place, I'm going to put Hierarchy of Needs, assuming that you can keep 30 meters or more of distance from your target, because it has good DPS. The perk is very easy to activate despite being tricky to actually take advantage of versus your target sometimes. And the tracking arrows aren't bad for normal enemies, and it gets easier to use with multiple teammates, but they're not required to get the best use out of it. Then at third, I'll put Touch of Malice, because the DPS is not bad at all. The Blight perk has very good utility, even though you will probably need 3 or 4 people to make full use of its damage, and it also damages you, so you have to be very careful when not in a well or a healing rift, just so that you don't accidentally die to the self-damage. Then at last place, I'm going to have to sadly put Outbreak Perfected, because it is a fantastic primary weapon, but the good DPS is just a last resort. It takes too long to get going compared to the other options on this list. You also need a full 5 or 6 stack to commit to using it. So it's not bad if you absolutely need something and nobody else has any of the other options, but it will struggle compared to the newer options like Touch of Malice, Hierarchy of Needs, and Revision 0. I would say keep using this as a primary because it's still fantastic as a pulse rifle, but maybe try the others for a last damage push. Anyway, that's all I have. I'm going to link my Twitch in the description down below because I'm going to start streaming again the first couple weeks of January. And if you like what I do, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you very much. See y'all in the next one.